Be me a non 28 years old licensed electrician. Work for a commercial contractor, not the kind of job where you sit in an air-conditioned office and debate the wording on a PowerPoint slide. The kind of job where you're on a half-finished floor at 5:30 in the morning with a coffee thermos and a bag of tools. And nobody cares how you feel about it. The building either gets power or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, that's your problem. Been doing this since I was 20. Started as an apprentice under a guy who had the personality of a traffic cone, but knew everything there was to know about wiring, worked my way up, got my license. Now I'm the one running jobs. Sometimes good pay, steady work, come home tired, sleep like a rock, own my apartment. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. Got a truck that runs. Got tools I've owned long enough to have opinions about the kind of life that isn't glamorous, but it works, and it's honest. Don't spend a lot of time thinking about what it means or how it looks. Just get up and do it. If you want to know the kind of person I am, here's the short version. I don't call in sick unless I actually can't physically get out of bed. And that's happened maybe twice in 8 years. I don't spend money I don't have. I'm not someone who needs to talk about his feelings at length. But I'm not someone who explodes either when something goes wrong at work. I slow down and think through it. Instead of reacting, that's not a personality choice. It's something the job trains into you. Because reacting fast with electricity gets people hurt, calm, methodical. Check before you touch. That's the mode I live in. I tell you this not to make myself sound like some ideal person, just to give you the picture. Because later on someone was going to call this particular way of being a symptom of something wrong with me. And I want you to have the full context. Sometime in my mid-20s, I ended up with a girlfriend, met her through a mutual friend at some kind of get-together. The kind where you're standing around with a drink and you don't really know half the people in the room. She was talking pretty confidently about something when I walked over. Seemed like she had things to say and wasn't waiting for permission to say them. Thought that was interesting. We ended up talking for a while, moved outside where it was quieter, talked for longer. She worked at some nonprofit, something to do with advocacy and outreach. She was pretty vague about the details when I asked, but she clearly cared about it a lot. She found out I was an electrician and said she respected tradespeople, that it was an undervalued form of labor. I said, yeah, it is, thanks, and we laughed about something, and that was sort of how it started. We saw each other a few times over the following weeks, casual at first, coffee, a walk, one dinner. She was sharp, opinionated, not boring to be around. I liked that she didn't need me to lead every conversation. She had plenty to say on her own. I'm not a huge talker by nature, so that worked out. Her apartment was interesting. The first time I went there, she had a lot of books. More than most people, I knew the kind of shelf that says something about its owner, even if you've never read any of the titles. She had little posters, the kind with text on them, inspirational or political. I couldn't always tell which was which. There was a mug on her kitchen counter that said something about smashing the patriarchy. I noticed it, didn't say anything, filed it away somewhere in the back of my head under things I'll think about later a few months in. We were properly together. It felt easy in the beginning. Most things did. She had opinions I didn't always share, but I don't think you need to agree on everything she talked about. Things like systemic issues and power structures and representation in a way that I mostly listened to without fully engaging, not because I thought she was wrong. More because I didn't have a lot to add to that particular conversation. I could talk about load calculations and breaker ratings for hours. She couldn't. We were square on that front. The first thing that started to snag a bit was when she'd make comments about my job. Not mean comments. More like she had this framework she kept applying to everything once she said something about how the trades were so male-dominated, and that had to affect the culture there. I said, yeah, it's mostly guys, and shrugged. She wanted more than that. Wanted me to have feelings about it. Wanted a conversation about masculinity and workplace dynamics. I said the main dynamic I experienced was that you needed to know what you were doing or you'd get yelled at. And that applied to everyone equally. She didn't love that answer. It wasn't a fight, but there was a specific look she got when I didn't engage with the framework. The way she hoped, I saw that look more and more over time. A few months after we started seeing each other, her lease was up, my place was bigger, and we were spending most nights together anyway. So the practical argument for her moving in was pretty clear. She moved in, and the first couple weeks were fine. The adjustment stuff, figuring out spaces and habits and rhythms. But then something shifted in a way I couldn't quite put words to. At first, it was subtle. Started noticing that she'd express things in a way that left a gap, like she was setting a scene and waiting to see what I did in it. Classic example. Came home after a long day. She was in the kitchen. Food wasn't started. She didn't say anything, just moved around quietly. I asked if she wanted help with dinner. She said no, it's fine, she'd handle it. So I sat down, started unwinding. Maybe an hour later, she made a comment about how it sometimes felt like she was managing everything herself. I said I had literally just offered, and she said it was fine. She said yes. But the offer should have come without her needing to wait for it. I looked at her for a second, trying to understand the geometry of what had just been said. If I offer help, and you say no, and then you're upset that I didn't help. There's no move that works there, I said something like that. And she said I was missing the point. Apparently, the point was something about anticipating needs rather than waiting to be asked. I said I had anticipated and asked, and the answer was no. She said that was technically true, but not really the thing she was trying to say. We dropped it, but that exchange stuck with me. It was the first one I could point to clearly. Others became clearer afterward. She'd say she was tired, and then just sit there with a particular look on her face. She'd mention that she hadn't heard from me about plans we'd half discussed, and leave that hanging. She'd say her back hurt, and wait always phrased in a way that was deniable. That couldn't technically be called a test, because it was worded as an observation. But the waiting was always there. The pause after the observation, where she was watching to see what I would do with it. Took me a while to name it, but once I named it, I couldn't unsee it. She was running small audits on me, constantly checking whether I was paying attention, whether I would respond correctly, whether I was meeting some standard I hadn't been shown in advance. There was one that I remember pretty specifically. She had mentioned 3 days earlier that she had a hard week coming up with some project deadline at the nonprofit. I had acknowledged it, said let me know if you need anything. The week passed, she handled it. It was fine then on the Sunday, after she said she felt like I hadn't been supportive that week. I asked what support would have looked like. She said I should have checked in more. I asked about how the project was going. I said I had offered to help. And she hadn't mentioned needing anything. She said the offer at the start wasn't the same as showing up throughout, that a supportive partner would have brought it up without needing to be prompted. I said, so you wanted me to remind you of the stressful thing you were going through? She said no. She wanted me to show that I was holding it in mind. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was that holding it in mind and asking about it repeatedly were two different things. And I had done the first one. I just said, okay, I'll try to check in more. She seemed satisfied with that. But I filed the exchange away because the logic of it was, I should know when to ask without being told, but if I ask at the wrong moment, I'm adding to the stress. And if I don't ask, I'm not supportive. There was no map for navigating that correctly. The territory kept moving. Another one happened. A few weeks later, we were supposed to go to a thing at her friend's place, a birthday thing. Casual. I had been on a job that ran long that day. Got home with about 40 minutes before we needed to leave. I was tired, genuinely tired, the kind where you're moving on maintenance. I suggested we maybe skip it or go late. She said it was her friend's birthday, and she'd been looking forward to it. I said, okay, let's go then. I'll get changed. She said she didn't want me to go if I was going to be like this. I asked what like this meant. She said low energy, not present, clearly wanting to be elsewhere. I said I was tired from work, not from her. And if she wanted to go, I was ready to go. She said it wasn't about whether I physically went. It was about whether I actually wanted to be there. I said wanting to be places at the end of a 10-hour day on a commercial build was a lot to ask of anyone. She said that wasn't the point. We went. It was fine. I was tired, but I talked to people, and nobody seemed to notice anything wrong with me, except her on the way home. She said she appreciated that I came, but she wished I could let myself enjoy things more. I didn't say anything to that, just drove the accumulation of those was the thing. Any single one of them, alone, would be nothing. A minor miscommunication, a bit of friction that gets smoothed out, but one after another, with the common thread always being that I had fallen short of something I wasn't told about in advance. It built into something heavier over time. The frustrating part wasn't even the behavior itself. It was that there was no version of talking about it that didn't immediately become a conversation about my deficiencies every time I tried to raise something that felt off. She had a term for it: deflection, emotional unavailability, fragile ego, toxic masculinity. She didn't use them as insults exactly, more as diagnoses. Like she was telling me what the scan showed. I stopped trying to have those conversations, not because I was backing down, more because they never went anywhere except to a place where I was the patient and she was the one who understood the illness. I had a buddy I'd see sometimes after work. We'd get food or sit somewhere and talk about nothing in particular. He knew her in a general way, had met her a couple times at group. Things mentioned some of what was going on once, kept it pretty brief. He didn't say much, just made a face that communicated something I didn't have a word. For the face of a man who has recognized something and doesn't want to be the one to say it out loud. That was enough. The relationship wasn't bad in every way. There were genuinely good parts. Weekends sometimes where we'd get out of the apartment and go somewhere, eat somewhere decent, walk around evenings where she'd be funny without meaning to be. Or we'd get into some random conversation that went on longer than expected. She had this habit of reading things out loud if she found them interesting, which annoyed me at first, and then became kind of endearing. She'd light up about things she cared about in a way that was hard not to like. But under all of it, there was always this hum, the hum of a relationship, where one person is constantly evaluating the other person's performance, and the other person is only half aware that there's a performance happening. I was becoming more aware of it. There was one specific evening, a few months before things fell apart, that I keep coming back to. We were sitting in the kitchen. She was on her laptop, doing something for work. I was eating and not saying much. She looked up at some point and said she sometimes felt invisible in our relationship. I said, "What do you mean?" She said it felt like I was always checked out, always somewhere else, mentally. Never fully present. I said I was literally sitting right there. She said physically yes, but emotionally there was a wall. I put my fork down and tried to actually think about what she was describing. Told her I wasn't great at filling silence with conversation for its own sake. That wasn't how I was wired, but that didn't mean I wasn't there. She said that was exactly the kind of thing she meant, that I processed everything as a problem to explain, rather than a feeling to share. I said, okay, what feeling should I be sharing right now? She said I shouldn't have to ask that if I were actually tuned in, I would just know. I sat with that for a second. You want me to demonstrate emotional attunement by correctly guessing what emotional response you're looking for right now. On Demand said something close to that. She said I was being defensive. I said I was trying to understand what would actually help. She sighed and said something about men and their relationship with vulnerability, and went back to her laptop. I finished eating. That was the conversation in miniature. The way most of them went, she wanted something I could feel the shape of, but couldn't quite grab onto because the description of it kept changing. The incident that ended, everything happened on a Friday. I'm going to be specific about the details because they matter, and I've thought about them enough that I remember them clearly. We were coming off a full week on a job that was behind schedule. I'd been pushing hard alongside the rest of the crew to get a commercial build ready for inspection. My boss had made it very clear that the inspection was Saturday morning, and everyone needed to be on site by 6 a.m. because the inspector was coming at 8. If the job wasn't ready, it would push the handover back by weeks, and nobody on that crew wanted that conversation. I had been reminded of this enough times I could recite it in my sleep. Thursday night, I had everything organized, clothes laid out, tools in the truck, paperwork sorted. She was home. We ate together. It was quiet, but not in a bad way. I told her I needed to be up at 5 and was going to turn in early. She said okay, seemed fine. No. Look, no pause. Just, okay. I was asleep by 10:30 maybe, possibly earlier. I'm a light sleeper by habit. The job does that to you. You're always half tuned in for something sometime after midnight. My phone went off. The room was dark. I grabbed it, saw her name on the screen. She wasn't in bed. I registered that in the foggy, half-awake way picked up her voice was different from the moment I heard it higher, slightly unsteady. The kind of voice that comes with either genuine fear or a very specific effort to produce the sound of genuine fear. She said she was having chest pain, said her heart felt strange, like it was doing something it shouldn't, said she was scared, and she was at her friend's place across the city. I sat up, asked where exactly she felt the pain, whether it was spreading into her arm or jaw, whether she was short of breath or feeling dizzy. These are not random questions. They're the ones that tell you what you're actually dealing with. She didn't answer them, said it was hard to describe, just felt wrong. She needed me to come. I asked whether she had called an ambulance. She hadn't. I said that if she was describing what she was describing, an ambulance wasn't just an option. It was faster and better equipped than me. Driving across the city at 1 a.m., they'd have what they needed. I wouldn't. She said she didn't want that. She wanted me specifically. And here's where something shifted in my head. Real fear doesn't do that. Real fear doesn't turn down the faster option to hold out for the preferred one. Real fear is not strategic. It does not negotiate. I've been on job sites when things go wrong, when something catches or falls, or someone gets hurt. Panic doesn't optimize. Panic just reacts. What I was hearing was not panic. I told her to hold on, opened a different app, found the contact for her friend, the one whose apartment she was supposedly at, sent a quick message asking if my girlfriend was there and if everything was okay. 2 minutes, maybe a little more, and the reply came back. Her friend said she had left over an hour ago, seemed totally fine when she left, and asked if something had happened. I sat there in the dark with that information for a moment. Then I called back, asked directly whether she was at home. Pause. Yes, she was home, but she still felt bad. I asked again whether she wanted me to call an ambulance for her. Now that she was confirmed to be home, no, she just wanted me to be there. I said that if she was home and safe and had symptoms she was concerned about, 911 was the right call, and they would come to her, that I was getting up in less than 5 hours for a critical job, that she was home, and that I was going back to sleep. Said it as calmly as I could, no edge in it, just what was true. She started raising her voice, said I was proving something about myself right now, that she couldn't believe I was making this about work, said a real partner showed up, no matter what. I said goodnight and meant it sincerely, put the phone on, silent, lay back down. Sleep took longer than usual, not because I was worried about her. I was pretty clear in my head about what had happened more, because something that had been half visible for months had just come fully into focus. There is a thing that happens when you finally identify a fault you've been chasing for a long time. The relief and the weight of it arrive together. I lay there with both of those things for a while, eventually slept. Alarm at 5, got up, coffee, truck, out the door before 5, 30 checked messages before pulling out of the parking lot. 17 missed calls between her number and 2 others I didn't recognize, and one that turned out to be a friend of hers I'd met twice, a string of texts from her that I read in the dim light under the site security lamp, the general shape of it. was that I had chosen my job over her safety, that she had reached out in a moment of genuine fear and I had hung up on her, that this was exactly the kind of behavior she had been afraid of for a while, that she now had her answer about what I actually prioritized. One of the messages had a sentence about how men always fall back on practicality when they don't want to confront their emotional limitations. I put the phone in my jacket and went to work. The inspection ran all morning and into the early afternoon panels, circuits, documentation, the inspector going through everything methodically, asking specific questions that needed specific answers, the kind of work that demands all of your actual attention. I was present for all of it. The crew was solid, everything checked out. Got back to the apartment late afternoon. She was there, had the look I mentioned, the expectant one, the one that communicated she was ready to receive an apology. I sat down in the chair across from her and didn't give one before I said anything. I thought about the best way to lay it out. Not because I was planning a speech, just because I'd had an 8-hour inspection to think it through and I was clear on the sequence. Told her I knew she was home when she called, because her friend had confirmed it, and I could show her the messages if she wanted to look at them. The expression shifted. She said her friend didn't have the full picture. I walked through it methodically. She had described specific cardiac symptoms. She had refused to call emergency services. She had deflected every question about where exactly the pain was and whether it was spreading anywhere. And the moment I suggested going back to sleep, the tone escalated significantly. None of that sequence matches a real medical emergency. She moved off the topic of the symptoms pretty fast, switched to saying that the point wasn't the specific details. The point was that she had reached out, and I hadn't come that love required showing up, even when you had doubts, that trust was not about verification, it was about choosing to show up. I said that responding to a false alarm as if it were real wasn't love, it was conditioning. She asked what that was supposed to mean. I said that when someone creates a situation specifically to see how you respond, and then uses your response as evidence of your character, that isn't a relationship moment. That's an experiment. She said I was being uncharitable. I said I was being accurate, which was different. We went in circles for a while, the way these conversations go when neither person will accept the other's starting point. She kept bringing it back to the emotional dimension, what support looks like, what love demands, what a partner owes. I kept bringing it back to what actually happened. It's hard to have that argument productively when one person treats the facts as beside the point. Eventually, we both got tired and stopped. That night was the kind of quiet that has actual weight to it. She faced away with the deliberate stillness that is its own kind of statement. I lay there for a while, then slept. The next couple of days were slow and uncomfortable. She was civil but detached, answering when spoken to but not initiating. Found out a few days later that she had posted about what happened, not with my name or anything identifying, but with enough specific detail that anyone who knew us would recognize the situation immediately. The framing was clean scared woman. Unresponsive partner, alone in the middle of the night, he chose his schedule over her. The comments under it were thorough and unsurprising. You deserve better. That's not a partner, that's a roommate. Men like this are why women can't trust. This is what male toxicity looks like in practice. One fairly long comment about how men use practicality as a shield against emotional accountability. How choosing logic over presence was a symptom of something deeper that he probably wasn't even aware of. I read the whole thing standing in the kitchen, still in my work clothes. Didn't leave a comment, didn't reach out to anyone to give them a different version of the story. Closed the app and made food. I thought about it while I ate, not with anger, more with a kind of tired clarity. There's a version of this story where I'm the villain that writes itself very easily. Girlfriend scared, boyfriend doesn't come. The end it requires leaving out. The question about the ambulance, the deflected symptoms, the confirmed location, the 5 hours of sleep before a 6-man job. But those parts are inconvenient for the narrative, so they just don't appear. And now, a couple hundred people who don't know me have a very clean picture of who I am. I understood why she did it. Not the motivation, exactly, but the mechanism she needed the story to make sense a certain way, and the internet was where she went to make it make sense. I didn't feel the need to correct it, partly because correcting it would have required me to go into detail publicly about a private situation, which I wasn't interested in, and partly because anyone who actually knew me and saw it would know there was more to it. And anyone who didn't know me, it didn't really matter. She came to me a few days after the initial incident, wanting to have a proper conversation. Said she wanted to approach it without the heat from before I said okay. Her position had clearly been workshopped since we last talked. It was more organized. The edges were smoother. She said she wasn't trying to say I was a bad person. She said I had a way of responding to emotional situations that prioritized analysis over connection, that this was probably something developed over time and not entirely my fault, but that it made it genuinely hard for her to feel safe being vulnerable around me because when she reached out, my first instinct was to verify rather than respond. She said that wasn't what vulnerability was supposed to be met with. I listened to all of it, then said that being vulnerable and staging a health scare at midnight were different categories of thing. And I wasn't going to agree that questioning a fake emergency was evidence of emotional incapacity. She said the word staging was unfair and loaded. I said fine. She could pick the word. The structure was the same regardless. She said I was doing the thing right now, turning a conversation about feelings into a debate about semantics. I said that when the words matter for understanding what actually happened, precision isn't avoidance, it's just accurate. She went quiet for a moment. Then she said something I genuinely wasn't expecting. She said maybe she had needed to know what I would do. She didn't say it exactly like that, but that was the shape of what she said, that she had wondered for a while whether I would actually show up for her in a real moment. And maybe on some level, she had needed to find out. I told her that was the most honest thing she'd said since the whole thing started. She looked a bit caught off guard by that response. I said I understood the need to know whether someone would actually be there when things got bad. That was a real thing people needed to feel in a relationship. And I didn't think there was anything wrong with needing it, but there was a considerable gap between needing to know that and manufacturing a scenario to test for it. If she had come to me at any point and said she wasn't sure I'd be there for her, I would have taken that seriously, and we could have talked about it. Instead, what I got was a call with cardiac symptoms at nearly 1 a.m. before a major inspection. She said she hadn't thought of it that way. I said I believed her. But that not thinking of it that way didn't change what it was. That conversation was the closest we came to actually talking about. The real thing didn't fix anything. The week after was the slowest part. We were both in the apartment, but it felt like a waiting room. Both being reasonable, both being civil, both moving around each other carefully. She took the post down at some point. I noticed, without commenting on it, she started sleeping on the couch some nights. Said she just needed space. I let her have it. There wasn't much left to say that hadn't already been said in some form. My buddy checked in around then, asked how things were going at home. I said they were going in one direction, and it was probably better to just let them get there without dragging it out. He said he'd have a beer. Waiting, the ending happened on a quiet evening about a week and a half after everything blew up. She started it. Which surprised me, said she had been doing a lot of thinking and didn't believe we were working anymore. Said she cared about me and didn't think I was a bad person, but that we seemed to want fundamentally different things from a relationship. She wanted something that felt like partnership and instinct and ease, and she felt like what I offered was competence and reliability, but not the emotional presence she needed. I said I thought she was probably right, that we wanted different things. She seemed slightly thrown by that, like she had been prepared to argue for the conclusion and didn't need to. We moved into the practical conversation. From there, The lease was mine, so she needed to find somewhere. We went through what was whose, what needed to happen, and in what order she'd be staying with a friend, while she sorted her next place. It was all pretty civil, more civil than most of what had come before, which felt like its own small irony. I let her take her time with the move. Stayed elsewhere for a stretch while she organized, came back once she'd cleared out. The last time I saw her was the brief handoff of some things she'd left behind, not hostile, not warm, just two people completing a transaction she left. And that was it. The apartment was quiet that evening in a specific way. The kind of quiet that means something has stopped rather than something being absent. My buddy followed through on the beer. We sat somewhere low-key and talked mostly about a job he was having trouble with, a residential rewire that kept throwing surprises toward the end. He asked how I was actually doing. I said I was fine, and I meant it. Not destroyed, not even particularly bitter, just tired in the way you get after a stretch that went on longer than it should have, and finally ended. He asked at some point whether I thought I could have handled any of it differently. I thought about it for a real second before answering, said, probably, yeah, in specific moments. Sure, I could have pushed harder on some of those early conversations. Instead of going quiet, could have named the pattern out loud earlier instead of just internally clocking it. Maybe some of that would have changed something. Maybe not, but the fundamental thing, the midnight call, the fake symptoms, the post, before I'd even had a chance to respond, I'm not sure what I could have done differently about that sequence. He said no, he didn't think so. Either we drove home separately the week or two after the breakup was stranger than I expected, not emotionally, more just practically. The apartment was different, not emptier exactly. She hadn't filled it with a huge amount of stuff, but there was a particular kind of quiet that took getting used to the absence of someone else's rhythm in a shared space. I'd come home, and the silence would register in a way it hadn't before she moved in. I'm someone who generally likes quiet. Always have been, but there's a difference between the quiet you choose and the quiet that's left behind by something that ended. It took a few weeks before the apartment just felt like mine again, instead of like a place something used to be. I ate better once she left. Weirdly, she had dietary opinions, and most of what we cooked was filtered through them. Nothing extreme, just a lot of things she didn't eat. For various reasons, I made a lot of pasta that first week, just because I could small things, but they added up to something that felt like exhaling. The thing that stayed with me afterward wasn't anger. It was more this slow recognition about the nature of what I had been in, not the relationship specifically. The dynamic, there's a certain kind of situation where the rules keep shifting just fast enough that you can never quite catch up where the goalposts move, and the movement always gets explained as you not understanding the real point, and the real point always turns out to be something you should have already known. I've been thinking about why that kind of dynamic is so hard to exit in real time, because from the inside it doesn't feel like a pattern, it feels like a series of individual failures. You failed to anticipate dinner, you failed to check in during the stressful week, you failed to seem enthusiastic enough at the birthday thing, you failed to come running at midnight. Each one arrives as its own isolated event with its own explanation attached. And because you're a reasonable person, you engage with each one individually. You try to do better, next time you adjust, you accommodate, and the adjustments don't accumulate into anything. Because the standard keeps adjusting too, you don't see the pattern because you're too busy responding to the individual instances. At least that's how it went for me. Working with electricity teaches you something about honesty. A system either works or it has a fault. You can trace any fault back to a specific point. If you look carefully enough, it doesn't matter how long the wire runs or how many connections it goes through. The fault is somewhere, and it's findable. What I kept coming back to was that she could frame it however she wanted. Emotional unavailability, toxic conditioning, men, and their relationship with vulnerability, whatever language she had available. The traceable event was that she called me at midnight describing a medical emergency that wasn't real, and when I didn't drive across the city at 1 a.m. on 4 hours of sleep before a major inspection. She turned that into a verdict on my character, and then posted the verdict publicly before I'd even had a chance to respond. That's the sequence. No amount of framing changes. The sequence: I went back to work the week after she moved out, 5 a.m., thermos, bag of tools. Same as always, there is something honest about work that's physical and specific. The problem is, in front of you, you either fix it or you don't. And you can tell which one is true by checking nobody sets a test, and then grades you on whether you ask the right questions, the wire carries current or it doesn't. I'm not going to sit here and say I have everything figured out about what I want or how I'm going to approach things. Going forward, probably some of what she said about me was right. I'm not the most expressive person, never have been. I've known that about myself for a long time. I don't fill silence automatically. I don't narrate my internal state unless asked. I don't perform warmth in ways that are visible, that's real, and I own it. But I also know that being with someone shouldn't feel like spending your energy trying to pass tests you didn't agree to take. Shouldn't feel like every natural reaction you have is being cataloged as evidence of something wrong with you. And it definitely shouldn't end with a fake emergency at midnight and a public post about male toxicity. Before you've had a chance to say a single word, in response, I think about the kind of relationship I'd actually want. When I let myself think about it, and it's not complicated, someone who says what they need, instead of engineering a scenario to see if I guess it's someone who thinks of me as a person to work things out with, rather than a test subject, someone whose version of vulnerability doesn't require me to perform responses on demand. That's it. That's the whole list. Doesn't seem like a lot to ask, but apparently it is a few weeks after everything was settled. She sent a message, said she had been thinking and wanted to know if I was open to talking. Read it, put the phone down, went to bed, had an early start, and I needed the sleep MFW. She expected me to abandon a 6-man crew on inspection morning for a fake cardiac event, MFW. She thought the apology was coming, and I walked in with her friend's messages instead. MFW. A man fact-checking a medical emergency somehow became the definition of toxic masculinity. FIW. The apartment is quieter now and I sleep better than I have in a long time. MFW. I still think about that mug sometimes. MFW. It said smash the patriarchy. But she never once thought about smashing the habit of testing people at midnight before a job, be me now. Alarm at 5, coffee, truck, tools building. Either gets power or it doesn't, that's all.